Well, Becky, thank you so much for joining us on the Rising Beyond podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to come on people's podcasts. It's fun.
Well, and I think the thing that when we've kind of just got introduced and touched base is the importance of helping really anyone going through a divorce, but specifically survivors of abuse and coercive control have all of the knowledge that they need to have the best outcomes possible.
100%. That is absolutely what I stand for. It's funny because I support people through divorce, and I say this all the time that I'm actually not for divorce. That's not something that I want to wish upon anybody. However, if it is something that you are dealing with, then it's really, really vitally important that you find out what your rights are so that you know how you can. I don't necessarily like the word fight, but you could advocate for yourself and for your family, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that yes, there is an adversarial piece of family court typically, and with my audience, the ex-partners are abusive, they are controlling, and they will use family court as another tool in their arsenal, and so if you can show up, 1, just knowing what you need to know, your rights, the best ways to present things, the best ways to document to where you're actually going to be heard, those kinds of things. And also show up as non adversarial as
Mhm.
possible,
That's
right?
that's how
There is such a balance because the opposing side is either going to show up one super adversarial
Mhm.
or trying to take on that victim role. And so what I talk about all the time is showing up in ways that refute the narrative, the false narrative that your ex is gonna say about you. That's how you're gonna show up.
Well, that's vitally important for you to be able to advocate for yourself and for your family in a way that is soft, right? Is still saying soft and being compassionate. Let me just give you an example. Obviously, my story is a little bit complicated, but I've been divorced twice actually. And the first one was pretty simple. We had a very difficult marriage and there was a lot of abuse that way, physically, emotionally, and verbally. We did not have any children. I couldn't have any children. Had 3 miscarriages my first year, and then we dealt with a lot of fertility and just never could get pregnant again, which was actually a blessing in the end. However, that one we never saw any court, we never saw any judge, nothing. We just signed on the paperwork and ended it. Now, the second one that I went through was incredibly abusive through the court system. And that is the reason why I do what I do now is I knew nothing. I mean, my nickname is Becky Brockovich. If
Mhm.
some of you have watched Aaron Brockovich, I talked to an attorney the other day that didn't know what that meant. I was like,
Wow.
you need to go watch Aaron Brockovich.
Yes.
So Becky Bulldog Brockovich. But here's the key is when I was going through my divorce and it was a 3.5, without giving all the details, but 3.5 year divorce to somebody that I was with less than 2 years, no children involved, 21 hearings, 21 subpoenas. And I'm going to explain to you
Mhm.
how subpoenas can win your case. However, the interesting thing about my situation is I switched my degree. I was getting my degree later on in years. I was in business management and I switched it to peace building, mediation, and conflict resolution,
Mhm.
right? And here I am was in the biggest conflict of my life, dealing with somebody that was really using the court system to abuse me.
Mhm.
I'm just gonna say it right out there because when you get stuck in the court system and he left me with very little funds, and so I had represented myself up against 5 attorneys, and I won my case. Now, there was some time where I had an attorney, but I didn't know anything about the court system to all of a sudden now studying and learning and what are my rights and what am I gonna stand for? How am I gonna advocate for myself? And I will tell you that there were times that I would go to class in my peace building classes, and I was ready to absolutely take the gavel and hit it over the head of the other attorney. And
Mhm.
I would go to my class, and my teacher was like, "That's not how we are peaceful." And for me, the day that I served divorce papers to my husband while he was coming off the island of Hawaii, he was flying off and moving off the island. My one prayer in my heart to God was, please keep my heart soft. So it was a little ironic that I went into peace building shortly after that, because that is what helped me with the greatest. I was talking to someone last week. It's not a weapon. Our heart is not a weapon. It is a tool in order for us to advocate in the correct way for ourselves. There is a way of leading with your heart, still seeing that other person that you're in conflict with love and compassion and boundaries, so that you're left in a better position then, regardless of what they say or do. I mean, believe me, there's every opportunity in the world when you're dealing with somebody that's abusive to go into that, like, I hate you, I hate world, I hate everything. But that doesn't leave you a better person. That only leaves you scarred, because that's exactly the game that they want to play. And I refused to let that happen to me.
Yeah, and your empathy, your compassion, your heart is what is weaponized against you when you're with them, right? That's the hook, is keeping you in it, is your empathy. You're willing to work on yourself, your willingness to be agreeable. And right, depends on where you are in your healing journey from all of these things. It is scary then to lean into that because they have been taken advantage of in that way.
It's scary.
And if you have been taught that having empathy means that you do not have set boundaries, that is actually fawning, right? That's a trauma response versus it has nothing to do with that empathy and compassion. And so finding that balance is really important. I would love to touch base on, because we were going to talk about like certain parts of documentation, because in family court, knowing your rights, knowing how to document, but then also that piece that we're going to spend a lot of time on is like, how do you do this documentation right? How do I file this motion correctly? How do I send a subpoena because I know my ex is hiding? They have their own business. They're hiding their financial resources. They have this second life. They have this, that whatever it might be. What are some of the, like, when you have someone who knows nothing, like they are like right in that beginning stages of like, oh my gosh, I'm going to go to court and I have no resources to have an attorney. Where should they start?
Well, and if you don't mind, I'm going to direct them to something that I give to people, because one of the first things that I think is probably the most important thing for you to understand is the terminology.
Yes.
If you don't understand what a motion is, if you don't understand what a subpoena is, if you don't understand what, child support is, or there's 3 types of alimony, and by the way, here's my preference. I am not an attorney.
Yep.
I am not even a licensed paralegal, okay? I do work for attorneys doing subpoenas. However, so what I'm sharing with you is what worked for me and what I learned, and always go and seek advice that way and seek knowledge. But look, nobody gets married to get divorced. And so when it hits you, you're like, oh my gosh, this is a whole new world. And so one of the things that I've put together is 100 divorce terms. And I'm happy to even send it to you too. You can send it to whoever you want to. But 100 divorce terms, if you can go through those divorce terms and literally, if you go to my website, beckysampson.com, it'll be there. You'll just look under free, wherever, I think it's free, download. And you just download that and start going through it term by term by term by term. Anything you don't understand, go to ChatGPT. Tell them your situation and say, hey, how do I deal with this? Because when I first started, I had no clue. And I find that that's the case for a lot of, even though I had been divorced before, but I hadn't dealt with this kind of, right out of the gate, I was dealing with an attorney. And I was like, oh my gosh, I had to go to hearings and fight for myself in front of a judge. I didn't know how the court system worked. I didn't know how to get things into the system, into the motions. I didn't even know what a motion was. The motion is the way that you get the court to do something, right? So if somebody's not doing something, you need to provide them a court order, or I shouldn't say a court order, a motion in order for the court to decide on something, in order for them to give you an order, so then something is enforceable. So it's like,
Yeah.
I didn't know all these things. And the only reason why I know subpoenas, and I'll back up to answer your question. The only reason why I knew about subpoena was because his attorney subpoenaed me for a bank record without even asking me for permission. I don't actually tell people to lead with subpoenas because subpoenas is kind of an aggressive move, but it sounds like a lot of people that follow you are dealing with more people who are not willing to give the information. So I just want you to know that subpoenas are a very, very, very powerful way of helping you settle for what is deserved. It's what I should say. But if you're just starting off the process, definitely learn the terminology.
Mhm.
Research, spend some time every day. Seek out people that actually know the law, whether they would be, attorneys, paralegals. In some states, paralegals can even help with some of this stuff. I would look into the statute. You may not know what a statute is, but that's how a statute is how the courts are supposed to.
Right? Like, in
Right.
theory.
Right. Yeah, one of the things my mom said during my whole process, she goes, "Becky, I've learned that the law is a suggestion." And I was like,
Yes.
"Oh."
I know, so gross and so true.
Yeah, and so you need to understand, but here's the thing, is when you're first starting, it is so, so easy to be in panic mode, and I always tell people one of the first things that you need to do is create a self-care plan. Because if you don't take care of yourself emotionally, physically, spiritually, financially, okay, it's going to be very difficult for you. So figuring out what are your resources? There's so many free resources in every single state. Now, are they a little difficult to get a hold of? Yes. And you need to be tenacious. And I remember I went to a conference a few months ago, here in this state, and there was some free resources. They had a booth and whatever. I'm like, "Well, then how do people find you?" Like, I didn't know you were available, but there
Right.
are resources that are out there. If you just dive a little bit, make a couple phone calls, there are attorneys who will go and represent you. That's very rare, but there are attorneys that will give you advice, that will help you understand what your laws, what there's all these of different organizations that are out there for you. ChatGPT now, I didn't have ChatGPT when I first started,
Right?
and I always asked ChatGPT to give me the resource for the statute
Mhm.
that's governing what it's giving to me, because I want to be able to go to the actual statute in that state to going, "Oh, okay, I know that this is the truth." I'll give you an example too. My husband and I are in a court case. We've been in a court case for the last year and a half for his granddaughter. And we went to court, and the judge said something that was inappropriate and was not correct according to the statute. So even though you have an attorney and even though you are in the court system, please know you need to still advocate for yourself. It's like with anything. Attorneys don't typically have all the time in the world, and you definitely don't want to pay them to educate you, because that is just something that people get in trouble all the time. They hand their case over to an attorney and think that it's all over with. And then they know 20, 30,000, $40,000 later that they don't have. They didn't even ask for some clarification. And I was like, "Are you kidding me? Like, these
Yeah.
attorneys work for you. You've got to advocate for yourself."
Yeah. Yeah, and it's so tricky. I do think it's like, when you're healing from abuse, when you're healing, knowing the language is
Yeah.
so right. I've had so many people, like, "Oh my gosh, when I heard you explain, you know, gaslighting," which is, now a much broader known term, but when I heard you explain that, or when I heard you explain what counter-parenting looked like, or what these things, it was like, you know
The level.
mind-blowing that this is what I've experienced. This is what it is. So having that education is so important. I do think having the list of terms is so helpful because there's so many.
Mhm.
Understanding the statutes, which are like the law, like Colorado Revised Statute number, blah, 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 right? That's what you're
Mhm.
looking for. And it is important to kind of research them, even if you have an attorney, because like here in Colorado, we've had a lot of shifts and changes in the last like 2 or 3 years.
Mm.
And there are even attorneys that don't know some of the new statutes, along with Caden's Law
Sure.
or House Bill 1350 that was a 2023 passage, or maybe that was 2024. But right, so there's all these new statutes put in place, and it can be really hard to understand how they fit
Yeah.
your case. And so
Yeah.
that when you're learning these things, and that is kind of some of the clarification you can get when you're like, you have the basic info and you bring basic info to maybe you're just doing a consult with an attorney. So you're not going to hire them full time on your case. You're just going to pay them for 2 hours of their time.
But I will say that the more educated you are with those terms, this is the thing, is those attorneys will have a greater respect for you. Like, you don't have to be an attorney, but I can't tell you how many times I got on the phone with an attorney and I would start using those terms, and they'd be like, "Oh, you actually know what's." "Yeah, I do." Like,
Mhm.
I've spent the time invested the time because I matter. 44% of women coming out of divorce end up in poverty. Well, I can tell you most of the reason for that is because you don't understand how the rules of the game work. And it is a game. It's it is a especially if you're dealing with someone that's abusive and they want you to surrender, they want you to say, "That's okay, I don't deserve anything," and the next thing you know, you're down the road and you don't have the money for your children, to provide for them because you didn't know what you didn't know.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you how many people come to me all the time and say, "Becky, I wish I would have known." Now, it happens to men too. I'm not saying this is just a woman issue because my sweet husband now, I'm happily married for the 3rd time and last, was left with 21 cents in his bank. He had no he never was really privy to know any of the finances. He just went and worked and brought money home, and I have no problem with somebody leaving with 21 cents if that's what you know and you have all the rights and you know what you're entitled to. But to just be, like, left like that because she makes a threat, "I got an attorney. If you get an attorney, I'm gonna take you for everything you have." And I'm like, "No, no, no. She got an attorney, and you didn't get an attorney to look it over, so she took you for everything." So, it's so, so important. And if there's one other thing that's kinda coming to my mind that you mentioned, when you're dealing with narcissistic is something that's thrown around all over the place. Understanding and, whether we can diagnose them or not, which is not you can.
Right. I'm like, I can.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think it's so important that because everybody throws around that.
Yeah.
Now, if they have those behaviors, it's super something that was so helpful for me was I started connecting the dots, and once I started connecting the dots, I started realizing this has very little to do with me. And so in order for me to back away emotionally and, like, take it personal, like when he was jabbing me and lying and stuff in court, and I mean, 21 hearings is a lot of hearings
Yeah.
to go to, and every single time there was something else I was having to battle with, and the more I researched about narcissistic behavior and the way that they think and the way that they function, I could remove myself from it easier. I'm not saying it was easy, but
Yeah.
easier and go, "You know what? Okay, how do I combat that? How do I still." And to me, I knew what he was fighting for. I had to put myself in his shoes. I go, "Why is he fighting so hard for what it's control and dominance?" And it was this feeling like I was gonna take him for everything that he had, and I never had that intention, never.
Yeah.
So having a clear intention within yourself and bringing that to the table with boundaries really puts you in the upper hand,
Yeah.
and allows you to advocate for yourself.
And I think something that's important is, especially if you are early on in the divorce process and you share children with this abusive person, you will do almost anything to keep your babies safe. And so, what I've seen, and I've talked about it a couple of times, but if you are new and listening, I really want you to hear this, is the reason the financial piece of the divorce, so not the custody parenting plan piece, but the reason the financial piece is actually so important is because once that, apart from child support, once the divorce is final, the finances are final, custody is not. And so I see so many mamas specifically who are literally like, I will give up every financial everything because he's saying if I do this, he will give me all the time with my baby. When I'm with my baby's safe. When they're with him, they're not safe. And
Right.
so they will fully give up the financial resources with the belief that they'll be the custodial parent and the other parent gets them on weekends. They can be Disneyland dad, whatever.
Right.
But once that decree is signed, they can come back and seek greater custody. And then if you are financially decimated from the divorce because that promise was made, right? Like if you do this financially, you can have the kids. Should you believe a word they've said? Probably not. Probably no, right? We should not believe. And so then they can come back and you
Yeah.
will not have the financial resources to
Find it.
fight what they're going to do. And so that, right, it's not because we're the narrative of like the money hungry
Well,
ex-wife.
that's what they'll make you feel.
Yes.
That is part of the game is that you didn't that was one of the things my second husband said to me before we even started the process in the court is he says, "Becky, I'm having a really hard time seeing the value that you bring to my life." And I turned to him and I said, you know, I said, "Here's the good news. I I know the value that I bring to your life. Whether or not you choose to see it or not in this relationship is none of my business." And when you are going for and I had people say the same thing, "Becky, all you're doing is it's all about the money, it's all about the money." It was not ever about the money. It was about me standing for who I am and the value I bring to a union, and guess what? I was a part of that, and I all I'm asking for was my part of it. I didn't wanna take your part, but especially when you have children. I didn't have children with him, so that wasn't my thing, but I also see that all the time. And now there are ways people don't know this, and I had an attorney on one of my podcasts the other day that said you can reopen a case after it's been closed. However, it's very difficult, and you have to be able to prove that you didn't have that information before you
Mhm.
settled. But I tell people all the time, I'm like, "I know you want the fight to end. I know it,
Just
but just hang in there. Hang in there because in the end, you wanna make sure that you are entitled. You are entitled. Now, I'm not saying entitlement like, "Oh, look at me. This is who I am," and, not that kinda thing. But in the law, whether you made that money or you did not make that money or you supported your children or you did not support your children. It is you need to study out what your rights are so that you can know what to stand for and be able to say, "Hey," and I have to say that as long as you know your rights, then you can then make a decision, "You know what? I'm gonna let that go, or I'm gonna figure out another way," or whatever it is.
yeah.
And because every situation's different. I mean, there's some women but that is part of the abuse that they absolutely use the financial thing, and especially if they're more powerful and they have more ability to make that money and all kinds of stuff. But I will say to you, in my case, I'm just gonna tell you, in my case, my former husband spent and the reason why I know this is because I subpoenaed every single bank record, but he spent over $150,000 fighting me in the court system. I spent about $870 or so out of my own pocket because I went back to the court and kept saying, "Look, I'm the one that's disadvantaged in this case. I'm doing everything I can to try to get my feet back on the ground and get going because they want to see that you're making an effort. You can't just sit there and
Yeah.
milk the system. They see that all the time. You have to make the efforts. But that's another thing I tell people is that you will never get in the court what you don't ask for. And so I kept asking and kept asking and kept asking. And he ended up having to pay my attorney because of he kept dragging it out and dragging it out and dragging it out. So you do have the right, if you are the one that's disadvantaged, to ask for the court's help in order for that spouse to support you. Even there's an alimony that's it's called emergency financial relief. That is a part of it. While you're going through the divorce, you can ask the other partner to pay you an alimony, and that's what happened in my case, is that he had to pay me alimony for part of the time while we were getting the divorce because I didn't have anywhere else. I mean, at that point, because I was a full-time student. So anyway, just knowing your rights, knowing what's possible, but please, 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 I always say divorce is temporary. That process of divorcing is temporary. And if you can just hang in there and again, research, know how to stand, make decisions on an educated basis, you're going to be able to come out a lot stronger than just giving in and letting the abuse to happen.
Yeah, and I'm thinking a lot of our mamas are post-decree. And they have right? So they're in that situation, divorce is final, and they are either being taken back to court left and right because they can, and the goal is to financially decimate you,
Yep.
right? And destroy you emotionally and all of those things, or you feel like, "Oh my gosh, I have to take them back. They are not following
Yeah.
these orders,"
Motion to compel.
right? And so very often, at least here in Colorado, and it is different state to state, if they are not following the order on one or two things, the judges actually don't care. Like, they just don't care. But if you are documenting over time and it's like they are not going to follow literally anything in this order, and you have documentation that they are not following,
Mhm.
you are going to go back to court. So many of the mamas, again, if you don't share kids with your ex, usually post decree, it's all done, right?
Right.
All done. And my mamas are stuck very often in the family court system. But there are still things that you can do within that post decree world and knowing your rights, knowing there's a motion to compel that is a little bit different than a motion of contempt, that is a little bit different than, and so it really is making sure that like that you have a good understanding, and finding the resources to find that.
Well, and people don't even, I mean, I never knew that you could post divorce still have rights. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah.
Like to me that was never something that I was ever educated on. And again, those terms, the more you understand the terms, the more you understand what you can do with those terms and how the system works. Well, so let me just talk a little bit about having an attorney versus not having an attorney.
Mhm.
Okay. Because for most of my hearings, I did not have an attorney, and it wasn't because I didn't want to, it was because I could not afford it. And so I ended up having to go straight in front of the judge, and there was one time where I think this judge was not happy because I was trying to act like a attorney, I was trying to have the terminology, and she's like,
Uh-huh.
so there's advantages to both because once I got an attorney, I really kind of in some ways lost my voice. I no longer was able to talk to the other attorney. I wasn't able to talk to the judge. I also let the judge know, look, I'm doing the best that I can with given what I have. And the judges were pretty understanding about that. Not always, but it's just your come from. But whether or not you represent yourself or you have an attorney, understanding how to present things and documentation will 110% make a difference to an attorney. An attorney and the judge like to see concrete evidence.
Yeah.
They don't want to, I mean, everybody can go to the court and be like, well, so and so, she said this and she said that and he said this. And they can't stand that stuff.
Mhm.
But if you say, look, and you say it calmly and say, hey, I've got this, this is the paperwork that I need. And again, using subpoenas, right?
Mhm.
I wasted 8 months in my case asking for, different things, and they would give me little bits, and then like, "Your Honor,
Right.
we're giving her stuff." And she's so like, "No, you didn't give me everything I asked
My
for."
gosh, it's like
So
every
every
single
case,
case that we had.
every case.
Every case.
So I say to people all the time, I'm like, stop asking for permission. Like literally stop asking for permission. If you've asked and they haven't responded, rather than wasting all your time in court and going back to the motion to compel and then them saying, well, Mr. So and so, you gotta pay. Just said, that's it. That's it. I'm just gonna go and subpoena it. And I learned how to do subpoenas. and subpoenaed. Within 2 weeks, I got all the information from the bank. No questions, nothing. And even when I turned my case over to my attorney was like, "How did you get, like, you're not even an attorney. Like, how did you get all these people to respond to your subpoenas?" I said, "'Cause I learned. I learned how to do them properly. I learned how to do it the way that I would get a response, because 1 out of every 3 subpoenas that gets issued out there gets rejected." So, and a lot of people come to me and say, "Well, I have an attorney, but they won't subpoena." I said, "I know. The reason why they don't like subpoenas is because it takes a little bit of elbow work.
Yeah.
And in order for those subpoenas to go through, you've got to dot your I's and your T's, and sometimes they don't have the time to do that. And so that's the reason why I now have a subpoena company doing them for attorneys, because that's all I do. But the point is that subpoenas and other things allow you to get the documents that you need. So a lot of people are like, "Well, who can I subpoena?" I'm like, "You can subpoena just about anybody out there. Like,
Yeah.
any organization. The IRS, I have found out, you cannot subpoena. But other than that, absolutely, you can go get the information, stop asking for permission, and go get what you need to help you build your case in order to show the judge, look, I'm doing the best that I can." And you can represent yourself. People don't think that you can, but you can. You've got a voice, and especially when you've been in an abusive relationship, it is very empowering, I will say. It's scary. I'm not gonna
Yeah.
lie. It's not an easy system, and I had a whole process that I put myself through because I was in Hawaii. So I would, in the morning, I'd tell people, "Don't call me, don't text me. I'm gonna go for my walk for 2 hours. I'm gonna meditate. I'm gonna do everything that I need to get myself in a really good space." So I'm speaking from a place of power and of conviction and of truth, and so that the judge could see that. And right before I go to court, I'd send all my texts out. I'm like, "Okay, prayer warriors, like, give it to me, you know?" And those were things that worked for me in the court, but I was such a documenter. I mean, I learned very quickly that that was the only way I was gonna win my case, and sure enough, is I ended up with 10 binders of paperwork
Oh my
where
gosh,
that
we
I
call
was
them the Trapper Keeper 2000 in our community. Because right? And what's funny is we actually have Trapper Keepers at my office, but
really?
the rings, a 1.5 inch, come on, that's not gonna do anything in our cases. Yeah, the Trapper Keeper 2000s, but documentation is so important.
So
Sometimes
important.
judges are like, "I wanna see it," or, "You can't get it in as evidence," and that's annoying. And you need to have it. And so I am interested. I think people listening will be interested of what could a subpoena do to help me. We've talked some about finances. So many of the flavors of our ex-partners have their own businesses,
Yep.
or it has been such financial abuse that their partners know zero about
Yep.
bonuses, about 401ks, about any of these things financially. So that's where I see people would potentially be thinking about that. But there are other people, places, things that you can subpoena. So what do you see? What are just some examples of what you're subpoenaing?
You can subpoena employee records, right? You can subpoena anything that is going to support your case. If you need to prove something, ask yourself, who would have the evidence in order for me to prove that? Like, a child's having a difficulty in school, you can subpoena the school. You can subpoena There's different types of subpoenas. Subpoenas for a document, or you've got a subpoena for a witness that wants to come in and can witness, like, sometimes. Now, there's also something called quashing. So,
I'm very
if you put
familiar with.
yes, yes. So, if an attorney puts in a subpoena, right, and then the other attorney has the opportunity to quash it. It's called quashing, which means I'm gonna stop it from happening, from them being able to perform, because a subpoena is a court order. So people don't know that it's whether an attorney signs it or whether a court clerk. So if you're representing yourself, the court clerk is the one that has to sign your subpoena, like they sign mine. And then once it's signed by that court clerk or for that attorney, then it gets served. Then once it gets served, they usually have about 2 weeks in order to comply with that. So let me think of some other ones that like if they're having behavioral problems or if you can see a pattern. Now, sometimes I've learned doing a child case with the one that we're in, right? That some counselors like yourself may not want to come and testify. Sometimes it helps and sometimes it doesn't help.
Mhm.
Sometimes the courts give it credit and sometimes not. So just always when you're trying to decide where to subpoena, I always ask myself, okay, what is the story? What is the evidence? What is the narrative? What do I need to prove to the court in order for them to see my side or everything? And then who has that information? And you can subpoena. I mean, for me, he was not able to hide any more assets. I mean, everything was on the table. And all I was asking was for fair and equitable division. I also just met with a guy the other day that he doesn't have a PI, but he can basically find out just about anything that you want. So there are people out there that will help you to find those things. People also don't know that when you're subpoenaing like a bank record or anything like that, you don't need the bank number in order, like some wives will say, "Well, I've never even been in the bank account. I don't even know, but I know it's this bank." I'm like, "Well, do
Mhm.
you have his social security number? Do you have his birth date? Do you know his legal name?" If you have those things, you can subpoena it, and there's some verbiage that you can put in that subpoena so that they will respond and give you everything that they're associated. But sometimes you do a subpoena and nothing comes back. So
Mhm.
sometimes it's a you're putting it out there, but I mean, I'm all for help, you know, finding out how to do it on your own because it can get kind of expensive if you're going through an attorney. But I also have told people if they want to come straight to me and they're working with an attorney, then they can work with me as long as I'm doing it through their attorney. I'll
Mhm.
show their attorney how easy it is to work with me. Again, I don't lead with the subpoena,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. And we talk a lot about how, right? I've done like specific niche podcast episodes of like, oh, you need to make a change to your parenting plan, or you need to make a
Mhm.
change in the custody orders or whatever. How do you go about doing it? So there is a process because again, you go straight for the subpoena. The narrative about you is something, right? But you're requesting information first in whichever way that needs to be, like, you're requesting to your ex directly, you're requesting, like, through attorneys, there's the request first. And there's the follow-up of like, "Hey, I requested such and such on this date. I have not heard a response," or, "I
Exactly.
only
You've got to
received
document
partial,"
everything.
right? And it's like, "Oh, like, unfortunately, I have not received these documents," and then subpoena happens. I will talk to, say, and I don't know if I've talked about it a whole lot on the podcast, but therapists, we are taught to first of all, be scared of court in general. Like people are taught that. We are taught to hold confidentiality as tightly as we possibly can. And so you may have a therapist who is not willing to testify. Please be honest with the therapist before, if you know this as you're trying to get a therapist and your only reason for having a therapist for your child is for court, that's not the reason to have a therapist.
Right.
But let the therapist know because we can save you time and money if it is not in the best interest of my kiddo that I'm working with,
Right.
I will quash your subpoena. I will have my attorney quash it because your child is the most important thing in the situation.
Well,
If
it's
it's
full
gonna harm your child,
transparency. Yeah. It
I'm not gonna do it.
yeah, and realize that the subpoenas they can be difficult for everyone involved, right? Like,
Mm,
even banks. I talked to a banker yesterday that was like, "Oh, I used to hate when those come in." You know what I mean? Things like that. So, it's puts people a little bit on an alert. Even when I'm doing the prep work, calling, people are just really nervous. They're like, "What's
mhm,
gonna what's happening?" Is the more you can communicate. Now, sometimes there's a banker that's like, "Hey, I'm willing to give you that information, but I need a subpoena." So,
mhm.
we go to them beforehand and say, "Hey, just so you know that there's something happening, and let me just prepare it, and then we can get it to you so that you can be compliant."
Yes.
And that's the thing. So communication's everything. And let me just say one other thing too that I really learned through this kid case, the granddaughter that
Mhm,
we're dealing with. I became meticulous about documenting everything. There was a period of time that we had her for 4 months straight with a little bit of visitations going back and forth, and every single night before I went to bed, I had an Excel spreadsheet where I documented the good, the bad, and the ugly every day. She came off the bus. She was acting like this. She ended up in timeout. This is how we just dealt with that, or she woke me up at 2 o'clock in the morning. I can't even tell you how many times in that documentation. And I had both the guardian ad litem on that spreadsheet so he could see live real time. And I
Mhm.
also had my attorney had access to that so that they could go in and the counselor, by the way, that we had her so that they could all be in that ring of communication. And they probably think, well, this girl's crazy. But you know what? That documentation, and you never know when it's going to come back that I can use that and be able to say, look, here's what our experience was when she was going on those visitations. This is how she was, there's just documentation. And I realize that it is a full-time job. It's a lot of
Yeah,
work. I
it's
I
a
remember
lot.
I remember saying to my husband going, "Man, I just wish I could go to bed without having to, like, document everything." But I'm like, I know that it mattered for her in order for and it's also years later for her to be able to unwind what happened in her life at this time. And we've told her that, "Look, at some point, you'll be able to look through all the binders and look through all the paperwork and see what we did to help keep you safe." And so there's multiple layers to documenting, whether it's the court, whether it's journaling, whether it's your own sanity, you know what I mean? To, like, go, "Hey, something's not right here." And you can start connecting the dots a lot more when it's on paper in front of you.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Yeah,
you're
and if
talking to, like, the
you're
number one documenter.
yeah, and if you're out there and you're like, "Fuck, I can't like, I don't have the bandwidth," document the big things. Like, you're not gonna right? It's like, document the big things. You don't have to document every day. If you literally do not have the
Yeah,
bandwidth to do it,
yeah.
that is okay. And being able to document like, the big things will show up and you'll know, like, "Oh, shit, I need to document this."
Yeah.
I
Well,
think
and just
this
have one place, one binder,
yes.
one journal, and make sure that that is in a safe space so that the kiddos don't see it
Yes.
or other people don't see it. They don't know that they can have access to it because that's a really as I was preparing for my divorce, the same thing. I never kept anything when dealing with my divorce when I was still with my husband. It was always at my girlfriend's place. So
Yeah.
that was really important to me that safety, safety, safety.
Yeah.
My safety, his safety. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And it's something that we don't people don't wanna think about, but we've got to make sure if you believe that you are not safe, you are probably not safe. And so we've gotta listen to that no matter what police have told you, no matter what the lawyers, no matter what the judge is saying, you know your ex-partner better than anyone. And so make sure that you are doing what you need to do to stay safe, because that is so important.
Well, and some people don't know too is that with protective orders, some people abuse them, right?
Yeah.
And others, it's difficult to get a protective order unless something has happened.
Yep.
So you have to continue, continue, continue to advocate for yourself. Set up a safety. Like I had several people. If I had to serve him the divorce papers before he left the island,
Yep.
I had 3 people set up that places that I could go that he wouldn't know where I was. I happened to serve him divorce papers in the airport on his way out on April Fool's Day, which is not a day that I would recommend. I mean, that's not like that wasn't my plan. However, it was during 2020 when the world was shutting down. And so I had to and I'm sure he tells the story that I'm just the most evil person and like, nope, I actually cried on my way home. I had tears in my eyes when I dropped him off because I knew how difficult it was gonna be for both of us. But sometimes we have to do things to take care of ourselves that doesn't I got to the point where I didn't care what other people thought. I needed to take care of me to take care of me because he had also told me on numerous occasions that he wanted to kill his ex-wife and had thought about it and all that stuff. And he was a former police officer. And so I'm like, I don't know if that was a threat to me to like keep in line, right? Or I don't care what it was. I was going to do everything I could to protect myself. And that is especially when you have kids too, especially when you got kids. And it's more important to get that tribe of people around you, counselors, friends, family that are healthy, right?
Yeah.
Healthy and not just going on the bandwagon going, "Oh, no, you don't need that. You don't need that.
Yeah.
I need some." Yeah.
Being really careful about who you put around you. Um, and the importance of having people around you who get it, who believe you, who you don't have to explain everything to. It's literally the reason that, as opposed to other kind of, I guess, business ideas or plans, that I have a
Yeah.
community, because community is what helps you heal, what helps keep you safe.
Yeah.
And community is everything in my book. So, well, I'm thinking if there was one last something that you were going to share with my community, the Rising Beyond podcast community, about anything kind of related to that documentation court process, so that they can leave feeling like they can do the thing.
My overall arching message for that I feel so important is that you matter. I spent a majority of my life not feeling like I mattered and that I had value because of the relationships I chose to be in. I mean, grateful I'm with someone now that sees that and tells me often. But regardless of whether he tells me or not, it's been a journey through the abusive relationships I've had or that I've called into my life or whatever, for me to get to the point where I really, really understand that I matter. And I know every single person, whether male or female out there, you matter, your kids matter. You're going to be thrown all kinds of different opposition in life to get to that point where you're like, look, it doesn't matter what everybody else thinks. It matters what I think. It matters that I see the value that I bring to my life and to other people's lives. It matters that I have people in my life that as I stand up for me, I stand up for them. And that's what you're modeling to your children, especially if you're dealing with a lot of mommies. You're modeling that to those children that, hey, I matter and I matter enough that I'm standing up for me and for you. And they're going to have the greatest amount of respect for you. You may not see it right now. And that's something that I say to my husband all the time. I'm like, kids are processing through all of this too. They're in trauma. They're on their own journey. However, the best way to show up for them and for other people in your life is to take care of you. And that to me is one of the most important messages. And I'm still in the journey. I'm still in the journey, right?
Yeah,
It's not
never.
perfect.
It's like always working. Like, one of my, she's been on this podcast, but her book is Always Enough, Never Done. Is the
Mm.
title of her book, because we
I
are
love that.
always enough and never done on our journeys.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just want to thank you. I always like to do this at the end of shows. I just thank you so much for the work that you're doing because this is a heavy space. And I really appreciate that you have chosen to stand up and to be an advocate for those that are going through this process as well and who sometimes can't stand for themselves, right? They have people like yourself around them to be able to give them the courage and the encouragement to keep going. So thank you so much for everything you do too.
Well, that definitely means something, because right, it is so hard sometimes being in the trenches, and everyone I work with is worth that, And so, yep, everyone, all of you listening, you are worth it. And we do this for you. And we just are so glad you're kind of with us. So, Becky, thank you so much.
Thank you so, so much. I so appreciate it.
And all of you listening, we appreciate you. And we will catch you on the next episode of the Rising Beyond podcast.
All right, stay strong.